Hello everyone, my name is Jack Edwards and I am a third year English literature student at the University of Durham. This is a bit of a different style video for me, but one that I'm very excited to make. Basically today The Testaments was released and this is the sequel to one of my all-time favourite books, The Handmaid's Tale. Now I will start by saying that I am incredibly sceptical about this book and whether it was actually necessary. However, I want to make sure that my opinion is not influenced by anyone else, so I haven't read any reviews, I haven't read anything on social media, I haven't even read the blurb yet. So today I'm going to be seeing if The Testaments is more Handmaid's Tale or Handmaid's Fail. So I should start by saying that my favourite kind of book to read is a dystopia. From Zamyatin's We to 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, I frickin' love dystopias. So I was buzzing when, for my A-level in English literature, we were told we would be studying The Handmaid's Tale, and I quickly became obsessed with it. Margaret Atwood chooses to refer to The Handmaid's Tale as speculative fiction rather than sci-fi because all of the events that happen in this corrupt regime are based on real-life events, and the oppression that happens is pretty conceivable in our own world. And she calls into question existing ideologies which persist on this planet, including misquoting Karl Marx. She questions interpretations of organised religion, particularly through the false prophet of Jezebel. One of my personal favourite things that Atwood discusses in The Handmaid's Tale is the separation of the mind and the spirit and the body. The female body in The Handmaid's Tale is abused, and it therefore becomes very, very vulnerable and also very, very important. This is probably best illustrated in a scene where Offred goes to visit a corrupt government doctor, and she's laying on the bed and there's a sheet over her, and she says that the sheet intersects her, literally separating her head with her mind and her spirit inside, and the body which is being abused. This is a deliberate detachment. In this world where she is defined by her physicality and her body, she takes ownership of her mentality and her internalized fire. And that itself is a rebellion. By keeping her own spirit strong in a totalitarian theocracy, she deflates those with power and maintains hope. Now, before I even read the blurb of The Testaments, I wanted to quickly explain why I personally don't think that The Handmaid's Tale needed a sequel. The ending of The Handmaid's Tale is incredibly ambiguous, in which Offred enters the darkness, or otherwise the light. We are left not knowing if she was saved by the female road who identified her as an ally, or whether Nick, who she sees as a sort of symmetrical figure, as like a mirror, saved her, or alternatively whether she was identified as a dangerous dissident of the regime and exiled. The historical notes at the back of the book make this even more complex, and they're often actually overlooked by criticism, which I think is such a disservice to that extra bit of the book. This section shows how historians of the future belittle Offred's experience, and it's sort of like a warning to us not to forget about the past actions that human beings have been capable of and preventing them from ever happening again. We are told that Offred audibly recorded her tale, and therefore she did survive in some capacity after the novel actually ends. There's an element of hope, there's an element of ambiguity, there's an element of tragedy in that these academics who we all look up to provide kind of knowledge and wisdom are so unwilling to acknowledge this oppression that she suffers. I just don't know what more needed to be said. But having said that, the reason I think that there is a sequel is because of the TV adaptation. Right now, we are living in a time where politics is particularly contentious and polarizing. People are turning to extremes. People found the dystopian elements of The Handmaid's Tale particularly pertinent today, despite the fact that it was published over 30 years ago, which makes it even more terrifying. I didn't actually watch the TV series, and that is because they gave Offred a name. They called her June. Now, for me, the whole point of the name Offred is that it is patronymic. It is commodifying, it is reifying. It makes her a possession of Fred, Offred, belonging to Fred. When you read The Handmaid's Tale, you are frequently reminded that Offred knows her own name, but she doesn't tell the reader that. And that is what makes her powerful. Her identity is something that she claims ownership of, in a world where non-uniformity is forbidden. And for anyone who has read the book closely, I'm pretty sure we all could make the educated guess that her name was actually June. In the opening chapter, there is a scene where the suppressed women are whispering their names to each other through the darkness in an act of defiance. Over the course of the novel, we meet every single character who is named here, aside from June, so we can pretty much guess that, like, her name is June. But the TV show didn't need to spell it out like that, I think, and I just love the book too much. I didn't want it to ruin it for me, so I didn't watch the TV series. Right now, I can't help but feel that The Testaments is just a money spinner. My current opinion is that The Testaments is just capitalizing on the current relevancy of The Handmaid's Tale, and it's just being done for the sake of it. However, I am so prepared to be wrong. I equally am praying like Aunt Lydia that I love this. So, I'm gonna shut up soon and just start reading it, but I thought I would quickly predict what I think is going to happen. Obviously, the first book was called The Handmaid's Tale, this one is called The Testament, so I imagine this is going to be a testimony from one of the other handmaids, or potentially more than one, since it's the Testament. Plural. Potentially, I think it might be Offred's daughter, who finds out who her mother was, identifies that revolutionary fire within her too, and sparks her own rebellion. I definitely can't imagine this still being from the perspective of Offred. I really hope it isn't. Part of me hopes that Nick might make a reappearance because I found his character very fascinating. Alternatively, it could take more of a perspective of the historical notes, where it's historians uncovering more and more about Gilead and understanding that it did actually happen and thinking about what they can do post that time. I am going to get cracking with reading this and I will update you when I'm done.
3 days later.
Okay, so it has been 3 days now since The Testaments came out. I finished it late last night and I have thoughts. So many thoughts. Firstly, I enjoyed it. It was a page turner and I couldn't put it down, but was it necessary as a sequel? I'm still not convinced. I think I said this before, but one of my favourite themes in The Handmaid's Tale was the concept of the body and the spirit, and the separation of those two, and this book took a bit of a different approach. It was more about the body and the actual physical rebellion, without obviously giving away the plot. Things are planted on the body, and the body is used as a vehicle for revolution. The first book was very much an internal monologue, where Offred rebelled internally, whereas this book is very much more active. In quite a big way actually, I did miss the symbolism and evocative language of The Handmaid's Tale, and it just wasn't the same in this book. She kind of replaced all of that with just dialogue, which to me just gave me way less of an attachment to the characters. I missed that yearning and mourning that Offred had, which was so gripping to read, and I just don't feel like any of the characters have the same emotional complexity and depth as The Handmaid's Tale did. If The Handmaid's Tale is the suffragists, then The Testaments is the suffragettes. Way more active, violent and aggressive, taking matters into their own hands to get the job done. And I do think that Margaret Atwood is stressing a sense of urgency, like change needs to happen right now, especially in the context of oppressive regimes and climate change. I get that and I appreciate that as a message in 2019, like we can no longer have that passive approach that Offred had, but I just miss the writing style of The Handmaid's Tale. One thing I did really like is that The Testaments is not overly based on certain corrupt politicians who may be leading countries at the moment. Because the huge, or should I say huge, popularity of The Handmaid's Tale is definitely in the context of Trumpty Dumpty. I was going to make a joke about a Boris Johnson-esque character being in the next Handmaid's Tale book, proroguing Parliament, but then I remembered that in the first book, written 30 years ago, they suspend Congress. We are literally living in a dystopia, but we'll talk about that another day. It would have been so easy for Margaret Atwood to introduce a Trump-esque figure into the Testaments and people would have eaten it up. There's an audience waiting for that. But I think she chose to focus on modern politics and history repeating itself much more subtly, and I appreciated that. I have seen people online saying that the wall is kind of an overt reference to Trump, but it was in the original Handmaid's Tale written 30 years ago, and also I'm pretty sure Margaret Atwood lived in Berlin when the wall was still there, so that's fake news. She does, however, focus on children being torn from their parents, people being treated like prisoners and subhuman, as well as addressing dispossession and refugees. Again, no spoilers, but there is a section where a protagonist needs to escape a country. And unfortunately, all of the other countries around the world have closed their borders. They will not let that person in. And we find that shocking, as Gilead is essentially a dystopian version of America. What is so important to remember is that so many countries are closing their borders to people as vulnerable as that person right now. One thing that the Testaments does really, really well is remind us that there is a fundamental difference between the people and the corrupt regimes and governments that happen to operate in the countries that they happen to live in. The Testaments is a novel about collaboration, and it's a lot more hopeful than the original, which I think we all need a little bit of right now. Also, one issue that I thought was dealt with spectacularly, which is very important right now, is the theme of sexual assault and the discussion in the context of the Me Too movement. However, although it was entertaining to read, I really just didn't feel like it had the same emotional depth and intensity that The Handmaid's Tale had. The original was a masterclass in descriptive and psychological writing, and the Testaments just feels a little bit lazy. It felt like Atwood had put in all of the legwork for the original book and kind of just took that for granted in the Testaments. And it's just so dialogue heavy, which honestly did just make it feel like it's being prepared to be a transcript for a TV show. Also, some of the writing from the perspective of like young adults and teenagers feels a little bit like it misses the mark a bit. The kids are equally naive and precocious, but like simultaneously. Those characters just felt weirdly inconsistent, and as a young person myself, they didn't feel like familiar voices that I recognised. Like, they just drew way too much on stereotypes in their relationships with each other and adults and figures of authority. And yeah, I think the representation of young people just felt a little bit off. A little bit inaccurate in general. Also, I hate to be that person, but I just felt like the plot twists were a tad predictable. To me, every major plot twist just sort of confirmed what we'd already guessed. I think my overall opinion is that this was a good read. It was entertaining and it was a page turner. But is it even close to The Handmaid's Tale stylistically? Absolutely not. I do feel like it deals with current political and social issues very well, and it doesn't damage the legacy of the first book in any way. I wouldn't say that it ruined any part of The Handmaid's Tale for me like I was worried it would, but I was kind of disappointed to see one of the sort of villains from the first book become a rebel in this one. I think it would have been way more interesting to hear from the perspective of the bad guys and how people could justify a regime like this, because people do. For me, that would have been way more interesting and complex, and that would have made this book so much better. Maybe I'm just being cynical, like, why is there so much hope in this novel? I don't know. I wanted to be obsessed with this and read it so many times and keep finding new information, but it just felt a bit straightforward. It just doesn't even compare to the original, in my opinion. And as I bring this video to a close, the important thing to remember is that this is just my opinion, and your opinion is so important too, and I would love to hear it, especially if you disagree with me. So please, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. One of my favourite things about studying literature is that no one ever fully agrees with each other, and there are so many nuances and different opinions, and I would absolutely love to hear them. Please change my mind. So those have been my thoughts on Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. This has been a bit of a different style video for me, but I hope you enjoyed it. I am very, very nervous to publish this video because it is my first sort of venture into talking about my degree critically and using it in analysis. If you did enjoy this style of video, please give it a thumbs up. I hope you liked it, and subscribe below for more from me. I am a third-year English Lit student, and I will be documenting my final year at university doing an English Lit degree. Yeah, let the discussion in the comments commence. I will see you down there. Goodbye.